without being told otherwise, we are particularly interested in the short-run aggregate supply as opposed to immediate short-run or long-run because they have less of economic meaning or insights. So now let's focus on short-run aggregate supply and talk about the change in that. So previously we said if there is a price change, we're simply gliding along the same supply curve from one point to another. Price change, the quantity change. But if something else change, for example, positive change, shock on supply, shift the supply curve right-hand side and increase it, means at every single price level, we're increasing the production, therefore supply increase shift right-hand side. If something happened to result in at every single price level, there's decrease in quantity production GDP, then aggregate supply curve shift left-hand side, aggregate supply decrease. Now let's talk about what are those factors. Those factors, generally speaking, there are three: input price, productivity, and the legal institutional environment. All of those three change the position of aggregate supply by changing the per unit production costs. This is a summary of what we're going to cover in next few slides. Now let's look at every single item. First one, input price. Input price, as we quick review of what we learned in chapter 1. For economic resource, there are only 4: labor, human resource, capital, human-made production effort like machines, factories, transportation, land, whatever you can dig out of motherland like natural resource, coal, crude oil, natural gas, solar, those type of things. And there's another one they didn't include over here is entrepreneurship, which is also human resource, but those people take risks and they conduct innovation. So we're saying production process, we're using resource to produce output. For example, if I want to produce some t-shirts, I have to hire workers, I have to get cotton or cloth, I have to use machines to make those final products t-shirts available. So those things are the costs of production procedure. And think about it, as producers, you don't want your production costs increase. Means, if I can produce a thing with $5 per piece, I wouldn't want to produce it with $6 per piece. Why? Because by minimizing the cost, I can be more competitive in the market and I can possibly earn a higher profit margin. So higher price of resource is a bad thing to supply. Whenever price of those resources increase, it is a negative shock to aggregate supply curve. Shift left-hand side, decrease. On the other hand, if the resource price increasing, then the per unit price for production cost will if the resource price decrease, then per unit production cost decrease, then aggregate supply increase, then shift right-hand side. Now let me give you example of each one. For example, labor. How can we get cheap labor? For example, if we have the immigration thing, and immigration will increase the labor supply. And whenever there's increase in labor supply, let me just go ahead, do a quick analysis for you. So if this labor market and this is the price of labor, which is a wage and a salary, how much you gotta pay to offer your labor, and horizontal is quantity of labor, then if this is a demand not changing and the supply of labor increase because of immigration, that will likely to drive the price of labor down. And for example, I'm an employer. Previously, I had to pay $10 per hour for my domestic worker. Now I only pay $8 because I have people from Mexico to work for the same job with lower pay. Then I did great. I'm going to pay lower costs. And why is that a good thing? Means at each price level, at each quantity of production, I can produce with the less costs, and I like to pass this saving into my final consumers. Therefore, at each quantity, I'm going to charge them a lower price. So previously I charged them over here, now I charge them over here. So supply increase, shift right hand side. And for capital, so give you an example, if prices of steel and electronic components decreases, resulting in lower price for machinery and equipment, then per unit production cost also decrease, then aggregate supply shift to the right hand side. Give you an example. So again, back to our 3D printer of auto parts. I give you an example. I think previously I gave you an example of a machine called a Verson stamp. Verson, V-E-R-S-O-N stamp. Each of those is pretty much like a big 3D printer specialized on printing auto parts, automobile parts. And each machine is very, very expensive. Each machine is $30 million. But the capacity of production of the machine is huge. Each machine can print 5 million auto parts per year. So if you're using it for 1 year, the per unit costs is $6. Total input cost 30 million. Produce 5 million of auto parts, per unit cost is only 6. Actually, it is cheaper than otherwise. So because of that, the resource price decrease, aggregate supply increase. And as far as the land and natural resource, if there's a new discovery or minor deposit, like a new oil field in Gulf Bay, or there's technology transfer of non-resources to valuable resource like a solar panel, then making the utility cost decrease. And again, that's a positive shock to aggregate supply. Supply curve shift right hand side increase. And give you a more timely example. That will be our import resource. If you listen to the Donald Trump speech last Friday, other than the issues addressed to COVID-19, he also said something about waiving the students' loan, and another thing he said is strategic buying of crude oil. So what happened last week? The crude oil price just dropped dramatically. Actually, it's still going down. It's still decreasing very dramatically as of now. What happened? OPEC, the cartel of petroleum production countries, cartel. They're the major countries mining crude oil and exporting crude oil to all over the world. They're packed broke because there's a war with Russia or something, because of crude oil. So they used to do what? They used to say, hey, as we're the major countries producing crude oil, we can work together to limit the production of crude oil to certain amount of barrels per year and make sure the price is high so that every one of us is benefiting or profiting out of this. This is a cartel. It is not legal domestically, but you cannot prevent the other countries doing so. And there's all type of cartels all over the world internationally. And but the cartel easily break if one player act up. And Saudi Arabia announced that they're going to increase their production and drive the price down, and they trigger everybody else just break the pact. So the crude oil price decreased dramatically. That is, in a short run, it is quite a shock to the stock market, make people wonder what is going on. But actually, it is a positive shock to aggregate supply. Donald Trump said at such a low price, we're going to strategically buy a lot of those crude oil, just store over there so that increase our crude oil supply domestically, decrease the utility cost, decrease the per unit production cost, therefore increase our aggregate supply and shift the aggregate supply curve right hand side. Okay, this is what we're looking for in future after the dust settles of COVID-19. So that's one example of imported resource. Another factor that is going to change the scenario of input price is exchange rate. Exchange rate, I covered exchange rate previously. Whenever we talk about how exchange rate influence aggregate demand. Now we're talking about how exchange rate change aggregate supply. So remember, we're talking about a buying resource. We want to either use the resource domestically or purchase overseas of those resources to produce output. Okay, so we're in a buying shoes. We're importing those things. So let's still use the same example. The example I used before is the American dollars and Japanese yen. Let me just use the whiteboard as this is pretty busy. Alright, let's talk about the American dollars and the Japanese yen. Now the exchange rate is $1 can get you 100 yen. And let's assume American dollars appreciate, which means it's getting more valuable and expensive. Now $1 can get you 200 yen. How does that change our supply? Means $1 can purchase us more stuff in Japan. So for example, previously $1 can get us 100 yen of coal in Japan. Of course, this is not an ideal example because Japan is very scarce in resource. We barely import any of the resource from Japan. Japan is a big buyer of resource, but because the exchange rate between dollars and Japanese yen is very easy for us to illustrate. Just bear with me with this example. Okay, and now $1 can get you 200 yen of coal in Japan. So, of course, this is a great thing. We can get in twice as much of an imported resource with the same dollar as we used to. So it's cheaper. It's at half the price. Actually, we're paying half the price for the same amount of products. So you can just imagine the imported resource price is decreasing. Therefore, that is a positive shock to aggregate supply and shift it right-hand side, make it increase. Okay. And now let's do an exercise. So I'm still using these clickers, but apparently we cannot be as interactive. So as opposed to be me sitting here pretending that we're doing the clickers on site, I will just go ahead, explain the answers, give you an answer and explain. What I want you to do is whenever you have a question, you come across this type of clicker question, pause the video, take your time, figure out, and move on and say if you got the right answer, why or why not. Okay. So, yeah, all right, welcome back. I'll assume you finish doing this one. So the answer to this question is option C. Why is that? Because we just said appreciation of dollar will increase the aggregate supply. So you can say A has increase in aggregate supply, B decrease out, C increase, okay, D reduce, decrease out. So in between A or C. Now the question is, how does appreciation of dollar change the demand? A quick review of what we learned before. Whenever dollars getting expensive, it discourages foreigners and domestic people buying domestically. How is that? Remember, so for example, previously Japanese people spent 100 yen to purchase $1 to get 1 can of Coca-Cola, and now they have to spend 200 yen to get $1 to buy 1 can of Coca-Cola. Why do they want to do that whenever they have 200 yen can buy 2 cans of Coca-Cola in Japan? Unknown. Meanwhile, American people tend to convert that $1 to 200 yen to buy 2 cans of Coca-Cola in Japan, as opposed to purchasing domestically. So that will discourage the demand. So appreciation of dollar move aggregate demand and aggregate supply to opposite direction. Okay. So this answer is C. Next one, pause the video, do it, and come back. All right, the answer to this one is B as a boy. aggregate supply 1, 2, 3, we can say shift left hand side decrease. We need to figure out which one will be a negative shock and decrease aggregate supply, and we can say it is B as boy. All the other 3 increase aggregate supply. All right. Second item, second factor or shifter of aggregate supply is productivity. Productivity is like how effective, how efficient the input is to produce. Whenever there's increase in productivity, of course, that will reduce the cost. Positive shock to aggregate supply, shifted right-hand side, while there's a decrease in productivity, decrease aggregate supply, shift left-hand side. Here, I want to formalize the idea of productivity. Productivity is, the formula is numerator as total number of output. So for example, I hired 3 workers, then total input here is 3 workers, and they are able to produce 100 t-shirts every hour. Then the per unit productivity of each worker per hour is about 33 shirts. Okay, so that's the productivity. It is a number. There's no dollar signs. It's like how many units each input is able to produce within a certain amount of time. While per unit production costs, you would think there's a dollar signs. That means for each unit of production, how much it costs me to produce. Remember my version stamp example. One version stamp is $30 million, and each one can produce 5 million auto parts. So per unit production cost is $6 if you're using 1 year. All right, let's try an exercise. All right, I'll assume you finished. The answer to that is D as dog. I said from AS3 to AS2, we can say apparently shift right hand side increase. Therefore, it could be something positive. Productivity is good thing, is the correct option, option D. Okay. This one, pause it. All right. The answer to this one is D as dog. So why is that? Let me show you. This is asking you the level of productivity. Level of productivity is, the formula is the number of output on numerator and number of input as denominator. And here it tells you that the output is 20 and how many input we're having 10. So D is the correct one. This one, pause. And now let me explain. The answer to this one is option D. How to solve that one? We're using the formula. The per unit production cost formula is total production costs as numerator and the number of output. So did they tell us the total production costs? It did not, but we can figure out. It said that we're using 10 units of input, and each of input is $4. So 10 multiplied 4 give you $40, while output is 20. So D is the correct one. Pause. All right, let's see what's the answer. The answer to this one is B as a boy. How is that? This one demands a bit of more calculation, but it's really sharing the same gist with the last one. It's also asking you the per unit production cost. So first of all, you have to figure out the total costs. Total cost of my input. They said they're employing 2 units of capital. 2 capital, and each one costs 20. So 2 multiply 10, I'm sorry, 10 is 20. And the second one is 5 raw material. Each one is $4. So it is another 20. And next one is 8 units of labor. Each one is 3. Interesting is the labor cost is so low, that is 24. So summation of the 3 total cost is 64. And how many units we're producing? We're producing 640. Okay. So 64 divided by 640, each unit cost you 10 cents. Lastly, the last factor or shifter of aggregate supply is the legal institutional environment. So how hard time the government impose on the businesses. First one is tax and subsidy. Nobody like tax. Higher tax increased the cost of my production. Previously, I produce each unit $1 and sell it for $1.20. I'm earning 20 cents of profit margin. Now the government step in to charge me 10 cents for each unit I produce and eat up my half of my profit, and I'm not happy about that. So I'll pass this burden on to final consumers. Instead of charging $1.20, I charge them $1.30. So that will shift the supply curve left-hand side. For each unit I produce, I'm charging them a higher price, aggregate supply decrease. Subsidy, on the other hand, is positive. Then subsidy is the opposite of tax, means the government give the business money to produce or reimburse partial of its costs. Say, how come? When does the government do that? The agriculture sector in the United States is heavily subsidized. Another more timely example is because of COVID-19, the government is providing subsidy and all type of support to pharmaceutical company, biotechnology company to develop medicine, vaccines, and produce medical facilities and necessities just to combat this virus. The second one will be government regulation. Generally speaking, regulation increase the cost of increase the compliance cost, the businesses have to adopt new methods or make adjustments to comply with the new regulation. Therefore, the cost of production is getting higher. It is negative then to the supply. For example, the Clean Air Act amendment was established to reduce the sulfur dioxide emission because sulfur dioxide is a precursor to acid rain. Acid rain is really bad to our health, to construction, to all type of things. And coal-fired power plants burn coal to generate heat, and sulfur is naturally contained in coal. So whenever they burn coal, they emit sulfur dioxide. In order to reduce this emission, they have to either purchase cleaner coal, increase the cost of production, or install this desulfurization system, again increase the cost of production. Negative, decrease supply, shift left hand side. Alright, next part we're going to cover equilibrium, and I will stop right here for this particular video clip. Thank you.